Hey everyone, it's Alexander, the real Mr. Robinson. Welcome to the channel. This is my review for the second feature-length animated feature from Walt Disney, Pinocchio, which came out in 1940 and is based off the Italian book, The Adventures of Pinocchio. It follows the adventures of this little wooden puppet named Pinocchio, which was the creation of this clockmaker slash puppeteer, Geppetto. Geppetto wishes that he was a real boy, so one night the blue fairy comes in, brings Pinocchio to life, but in order to actually become a real boy, he has to learn all the life lessons, what's right, what's wrong, be selfless and not selfish, and he's guided by his conscience, Jiminy Cricket. So Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is obviously one of the greatest animated movies of all time, but at the end of that review I mentioned that I think Pinocchio is a better movie. And it very much is. Everything that Snow White accomplished when it came out in 1937, Pinocchio would end up taking several steps further. The animation is even better this time around. There's not really a spot in this movie where I can look at the animation and go, yeah, it's a little glitchy, or that could have been a little better. No, the animation from beginning to end is just absolutely stellar, and it did break some new grounds by inventing the technique used to do 2D animation underwater. Basically, the way this was accomplished was that they put a piece of glass in front of the animation, but a piece of glass that gave you the impression that you were underwater. And this technique would later be applied several decades later with The Little Mermaid, which we are a ways away from talking about. And then another technique in terms of the animation that was utilized in Snow White that I didn't mention was the fact that the animators had some sort of live action reference, especially considering that with Snow White you had Snow White herself and the prince, who were more realistic looking characters. So there was live action footage of actors performing the scenes in the movie that the animators would later on take and animate the actual movie using the footage as a frame of reference. And that technique is very much utilized when it comes to the Blue Fairy. When you see the way she's animated, you can tell it's very different from the way every other character in this movie is animated, who looks pretty cartoonish by comparison. And the effects that they do with the Blue Fairy by making her transparent is very impressive. So overall, this movie is pretty much a technical masterpiece in terms of animation. But in terms of all the non-technical stuff, this movie is still better than Snow White in my opinion. Pinocchio as your main character, I think, is a much more interesting character than Snow White was. Sure, he's as dumb as a piece of wood because, well, he is a piece of wood, and he's also unbearably naive at points. But at the same time, he's just a little boy. He's trying to learn his way into the world. He hasn't quite gotten a grasp on what's right, what's wrong. Even with his conscience at his side, Jiminy Cricket, he still makes mistakes here and there and has to learn throughout his adventures. I mean, to quote Vision in Age of Ultron, he was born yesterday. So for anyone who wants to criticize Pinocchio for just being a dumb idiot character, he is, but he's also young and naive, so cut the kid some slack. Although I have to say, every time I watch this movie, the thing that always cracks me up is the fact that Honest John and Giddy are anthropomorphic fox and a cat. Everybody in this village seems perfectly fine with a giant anthropomorphic fox and cat walking around, but for some reason a puppet boy that is given life and can move around without strings is the most unrealistic aspect about this movie. That always cracks me up. And it gets even weirder when you realize that Figaro is just a regular old house kitty owned by Geppetto, and then wait, you exist in the same world as an anthropomorphic mute cat? That part always weirded me out, and this movie doesn't really shy away from being weird, which in a way is one of the film's charms, that it has all these fantastical elements that you really don't question. And speaking of those fantastical elements, this movie is not afraid to not only be weird, but to be downright sadistic. This is a straight up horror movie when you think about it. The movie takes so much joy in torturing this main character because of the bad decisions he's made, which I guess is sort of the point of the movie. When Honest John and Giddy lead Pinocchio to Stromboli's and he becomes one of Stromboli's newest acts, you think it's all going to be fun because he's a big hit. But when Stromboli throws him into a birdcage and threatens to chop him up into firewood if he leaves, That's horrifying. The entire Pleasure Island sequence is the stuff of nightmares for kids. I mean, if you think that the forest from Snow White is scary for kids, the Pleasure Island moment where you see all these little boys turn into donkeys will fuck them up for life. To be honest, this movie should be played in the Scared Straight program for boys who are just spoiled brats. If you end up being a really bad boy, you're either going to be locked up in a cage or you're going to get turned into a donkey where you will never see your family again. And when Roger Ebert was still alive, he and Gene Siskel reviewed this movie during one of its theatrical re-releases. And not only does he cite this movie as his favorite Disney animated movie, but he also cites it as the movie that has kept him from smoking a cigar throughout his entire life. So if the greatest film critic who has ever lived could have been scared to death by smoking a cigar because of this movie, then I feel like this movie could do a lot for all the spoiled boys out there in the world. And then, of course, we have what is undeniably the most iconic sequence in this movie, where Pinocchio tells a lie and his nose grows as a result of it. I failed to mention this in my original video recording, so I'm making it up in audio form. This sequence is so iconic because it really does show that, yeah, you lie, that lie is going to continue growing and growing until you get yourself into more trouble. Much like with the nose. While not as horrifying as the Pleasure Island sequences, in fact, this one's a little more fantastical than it probably should be. It's still a great moment and shows kids that, yeah, don't lie because people can see right through you. And one of my favorite little moments from this scene is that the Blue Fairy pretends to believe Pinocchio's lies, but you can kind of tell with the tone of her voice that, yeah, I don't believe a word you are saying, but yeah, keep digging yourself in that hole. Let's see how long your nose can grow. But of course, with Pinocchio, he does learn his lesson. He ends up being a good boy at the end of the day, and it gives you that satisfying Disney ending. Like, that sounds cliche to say, but considering that the rest of the movie takes so much joy in just being a horror show for kids, the end of the movie definitely deserves that heartfelt ending. I haven't said a whole lot about Jiminy Cricket. That's because, to be honest, for being one of the most famous Disney sidekicks out there, he doesn't leave that much of an impression on me. Although I do have to say, rewatching this movie for this review, I am surprised at how horny Jiminy Cricket can be for inanimate objects. I mean, all the little wooden women figurines that Geppetto made in his workshop, Jiminy has an affection for. During the sequence at Stromboli's, when you see those puppets doing the can-can, Jiminy Cricket's trying to ignore Pinocchio just because he's mad. But then when he looks over at the puppets, he's just like, whoa. Like, he's got to control himself in terms of his cricket hormones. But to be serious for a second, the one thing that Jiminy Cricket does actually contribute greatly that is still remembered to this day is that the voice actor Cliff Edwards is responsible for singing the iconic When You Wish Upon a Star, which has become the official theme for Disney. Whether you see a movie from Disney, whether you go to any of the theme parks, When You Wish Upon a Star is guaranteed to play every time. And the second you think about it, you think about Disney. And to be honest, I think about Disney as a whole more than I do Pinocchio when I think about this song. But it's an iconic song, and for being the company's main theme, it's a good theme to pick. The last thing I really want to talk about before I get into my rating and just the overall wrap-up is the big climax of the movie involving Monstro, the giant killer whale. Okay, not technically a killer whale, but just a giant whale. And this character and the entire action sequence at the end was animated by one of the 9 old men, Wolfgang Reitherman. And the way Monstro is depicted in this movie, it is scary in its own right. You never get a full wide shot of Monstro's entire body. The way the movie is framed to show Monstro, it will only show half of his body most of the time, whether it's in close-ups or at a distance. And anytime you even get to see Monstro's full body, usually it's underwater where it's murky or covered in either smoke or waves. So you really don't get a full glimpse of this monster. And the big chase at the end of the movie is just beautifully animated, and it is tense. Monstro is a true beast, and considering I'm a giant monster fan, I would have been kicking myself if I did not once mention Monstro in this review. So to wrap things up, Pinocchio is, much like with Snow White, a masterpiece, except much better than Snow White in my opinion. The animation looks even better than before. It has a dark, sadistic side to it that it completely embraces, but unfortunately I don't see modern day Disney animation even going down this route the way Pinocchio did. It's got a great climax, the songs are iconic, the characters are great. It is just a great movie. But that being said, I'm still gonna say worth seeing in your lifetime. I'm not gonna give it my highest rating out there, partially because it's not one of my favorite Disney animated features, at least within my top 10. It's still fantastic, but there are other movies that I'd probably want to rewatch more and more above Pinocchio, but still, it's a masterpiece in every sense of the word. And there you go, that's my review for Pinocchio, one of the greatest animated features of all time that was not a hit when it came out. Yeah, believe it or not, this movie was not a financial success when it came out in 1940. One factor is because it had twice the budget of Snow White, but the main factor was that because World War II was going on at this point, European and Asian markets were cut off from the film industry, so it wasn't able to actually become a financial success until it was reissued several times in theaters. And the same thing would happen to next week's movie, Fantasia, which if you've been following my channel for a couple of years, you may have heard me talk about this movie at one point, but I'm really excited to talk about Fantasia in depth next week. But now I want to know what you guys think about Pinocchio. If you've seen it, what did you think? Do you think this movie's better than Snow White? Does it rank among your personal top 10 list of Disney animated movies? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this review. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, leave a comment, support my Patreon page, follow me on social media, and until then, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you, there is only one.